Hey everyone, welcome to the Parts Girl podcast. I have Cory Scheer here with me with TrustCentric. Welcome, Cory.
Thank you so much, Kaylee. It's great to be with you today.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be interviewing you, especially because you have a book called Closing the Trust Gap, which I want to talk about. But first, give a little background on just who you are, and then we'll
Yeah,
dive into just what your book's all about.
that sounds great. Well, thanks again for having me. I'll start with what matters most to me. My wife and I, we're coming up on our 25th anniversary here next week, actually, and we're excited about that. And then we have 4 kids. We have a 21-year-old, 19-year-old, 13-year-old, and 12-year-old, and we live in the Kansas City area. We live in a town called Liberty, Missouri, which is northeast of Kansas City by about 15 miles, but we're all part of the overall metroplex here in Kansas City. We've lived here for 16 years, from the west out in Colorado, Wyoming area, but have lived here in Kansas City during that time. And I am the founder and CEO of a company called TrustCentric, and we're an organizational and leadership development consulting firm. We work with all sorts of companies, with leaders, leadership teams, overall employee, total number of employees we can certainly work with. And what we primarily do is we help them measure their current level of trust and the condition of their workplace culture. And then where there are any gaps, we're able to provide different resources and tools and frameworks, as well as just relational support for them in order to help navigate how do you change these conditions? How do you close these gaps? How do you improve focus, retention, productivity, work ethic, all of those things? And that's the work that we have the privilege of doing every day. It's been a fantastic opportunity to really help a lot of clients.
And how long have you guys been doing this?
The business is 3 years old, but I really started full time about 10 months ago. So new as a full time entrepreneur, but we had over 40 client engagements in 2023, and we're really, really busy already for 2024. So we've had good growth, strong momentum, and it does not feel like we've only been full time for 10 months. And as a result of that, we're learning a lot still, and grateful that there are clients that want to work with us, and now referring us to even newer clients, which is great.
Yeah, isn't that the best, the referrals that you get? They're just, that's how you just can grow so fast. And I wanted to ask you, because I think when we first connected, I'm like, why would you want to come on my podcast? Like, I'm so focused, but I do. I mean, I have a lot of leaders on, and there's leaders in the dealership. So I could see now, learning more about your book and, what you guys are doing, why you would want to come on. So where did this come from? I mean, just even the
Yeah.
title, Closing the Trust Gap, where did that stem from?
Yeah, so the title itself came from actually my wife. My wife was the one that came up with the title, and we were driving down the interstate one day, and I was going to call it something else, and she said, "Why don't you call it Closing the Trust Gap? Because even if I didn't know you and I saw the title of that book, I probably would pick it up and buy it." And I worked with our developmental editor. They loved the title, and we went with that. And really glad that we called it that. And the premise of the book is it really traces back to my doctoral research, as well as some of the national research that I have done in partnership with a person named Kurt Bartolich, who runs a company called Brand Certain. They do brand repositioning. All of the quantitative side are brand repositioning. And he's a survey expert, and we partnered together, and I asked these trust questions, and we got all of the data back. And what we found with the data were lots of gaps in trust in a lot of very critical areas. One of the gaps was the gap in trust between employees and their leaders is on average about 51%. So 51% of employees do not have a high level of trust for their leaders, which is
Wow.
very significant. I mean, I've worked with car dealerships before. It was fairly large car dealership of 100 people. Those 100 individuals, about 35 of them were in the service side, another 10 were on the parts side, and then of course your sales staff and your administrative staff. And if you think about if half of your sales team or half of your parts staff or half of your administrative team, they don't have a high level of trust for the leadership team, that's going to have a significant impact, not only on the condition of the workplace, but also on the customer experience as well. And the other gap that really stood out to us of all of the data that we got back was the perception of trust between where the leader felt like things were within the workplace and then where the frontline employees felt like things were. And that gap on average was about 31%. So a leader might think something is going great. The frontline employee may think something is not going great. You have your middle managers and your supervisors that are somewhere in the middle, literally standing in the gap, doing their best to help hold things together. And what we do is we help assess and we measure, we quantify any potential gaps or real gaps that are occurring, and then we provide solutions to help them close that gap. And that's really what the book is. The book talks about not only the epidemic of distrust that is occurring across all industries, it talks about some of the trends that is occurring right now within workplace cultures and the challenges of the last few years, of course. Then it introduces a framework that is a simple and replicable framework that we call the structure of trust. And it breaks trust down into a few different elements. And those few different elements are things that once they're measured and assessed, then the leaders of the organization can begin to take action on helping improve the conditions of trust. And then just very practical, helpful stories in here, real experiences, other experiences that I've learned from clients, as well as just business development, organizational leadership development principles that are shared within the book that I think it's been helpful for people who have read it. And it's a fairly straightforward read. I call it a round trip flight read, where you could get on a flight from Philadelphia, you could fly to LA and back. And by the time you landed, you'd probably be done or almost done with the book.
Yeah, I could see that definitely with having the book now. What I wanted to ask you was, I love how you highlighted that there are real stories, because I think that's what resonates the most with people. It's the real life experiences, and the fact that you brought up the perception, because I hear that a lot when I'm joining like clubhouses or just discussions where you have, as a leader, you could think that everything's great, but you have to actually ask and communicate with your team to figure out if it's actually going the way that you think. I'm sure you do, but can you provide suggestions, just like a couple that you
Sure.
could suggest here on
Yeah.
the show?
Yeah, absolutely. The structure of trust, I'll give you just kind of a quick overview of it. What it talks about is within every organization, you've got the people of the organization, you have the policies and the practices. It doesn't matter, every organization, small, large, it does not matter the industry. You always have these two realms of people and policies and practices. And for both the realms of people and the realms of policy and practice, there are three building blocks that are vital in order to strengthen trust. And these building blocks combine with these two realms. That's what we call the structure of trust. This is the framework by which we can begin to assess and understand trust more deeply. Trust is something that it is a universal truth. We don't need to convince people why it's important. We feel it when we have it. We know what it feels like when it's absent. And if you have ever been a part of a toxic workplace, it's terrible. It affects many things, including mental health, physical health, social health, vocational purpose, all of those things. And unfortunately, many of us have been a part of a very toxic, significant workplace. And so with the structure of trust, what we're able to do is understand trust in a little bit more of its kind of broken down parts. And the three building blocks of trust, the first one is competency. And with competency, that includes things like technical ability, the things that you get hired for on your resume. It also includes things like leadership competency, communication competency, financial literacy, project planning, time management, all of the things that allow you to do the work that you do well. Those are competencies that you have, that you bring, and that you can strengthen, you can grow, which is a good thing. The second building block is problem solving. And if we are really, really good at what we do, but we don't both identify the right problems to solve and then solve them in an effective way, we can break down trust within our teams. And that's where you get people who are kind of like the know-it-alls. They're really, really technically proficient perhaps, but they're not aware of the problems that are needing to be solved, or maybe the problems that they are creating. And that's where you begin to have this gap, this breakdown of trust. And then the third, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. You finish and then I have.
Yeah, the last one real quick is the third building block, which is the building block of caring for others. And what we find in our research, especially with corporations, not as much with nonprofit and educational institutions, they tend to be higher in this building block. But with small businesses and corporations, we see that the building block of caring for others is lower than problem solving and competency. And when we talk about caring for others, what we're really talking about is the willingness and the willingness and the ability for people to listen to their employees, listen to their customers, to listen with intent without distraction. It's the ability to show sympathy and empathy and emotional intelligence. Is about caring for the needs of the whole person versus treating them as a number or a cog in a wheel or a pawn on a chessboard. And these three building blocks, when combined and put together, what the research has shown now for a couple of decades, this was the framework that I used for my doctoral work, and they started talking about this many years ago. But as they discovered this, what they realized was these three building blocks, when combined, they will increase the value proposition. So they will improve the value that is placed upon a customer to organization interaction or an employee to employee interaction. It will improve the value, and then it will also improve the loyalty. So it will deepen that loyalty that a customer or an employee has for the organization. So when we build up trust, we are actually having a direct effect on the employee loyalty and the customer loyalty of the companies that we work with in, which those are all things that are really important. And those are all things that are going to affect your end results, your KPIs, your bottom line, all of those things, those downstream indicators. If you go all the way upstream, the origin or the headwaters of those critical downstream indicators, it has to begin with trust.
It does. And I could see why you have worked with some dealerships, because there's so much division between, I'm just focused on fixed ops right. Well, even the whole dealership, like sales, parts, they're divided. Everyone's so divided. So I can see why there's such an opportunity for your structure and what you're talking about to bridge those trust gaps, because especially I think too with like technicians and parts, or technicians and like the whole ecosystem of
Yes.
the dealership. So can you share any discoveries or things that you've worked on with a few dealerships, or anyone that you've worked with
Sure, you
that
bet.
really stood out to you?
Yeah, the couple of just very significant findings and learnings which we were able to work through together, and I helped facilitate the process of both discovery. We did a full assessment for the entire dealership of all 100 employees. It's a 49 question assessment that's focused on workplace culture and trust. And when we got the data back, we actually cut the data. We looked at the data in terms of sales and service, parts, admin, and there may have been one other. I think those were the primary four that we looked at. So we looked at them individually, and then we looked at them collectively. What we found was the group that actually rated trust to be the highest were the sales. That was the sales team. So they had the highest rating for trust within their department or their division. The group that had the lowest rating of trust for this particular dealership was actually the service. That was the service side of, and they were a very busy service side. One of the challenges that they had, and what was discovered through this facilitated workshop that we conducted with them, and it was actually done in their city, so they were able to bring in all of their leadership team members, and you had the founding member of the dealership with all of the other key leaders, and we looked at the data, and as we looked at that data, we realized that some of their expectations and their policies regarding the service side of things were very high volume and very low margin of error in terms of the scheduling. So if one person called in sick, then it had a huge ripple effect all the way through the service. They had to scramble. Oftentimes they didn't meet their quota. That put pressure on that side of the business. But then all the while, sales, they were succeeding. They were having good years. So they felt like things were going okay. So now what you have is a leadership team that is dealing with their sales team were doing well. So their trust score was high. The service team was almost 25 or 30 points lower in their trust score. You have admin that's in between, and then parts that's kind of in between. And the opportunity was for this leadership team to get on the same page, offer opportunities for support, figure out ways to close the trust gap, and even change some of their policy expectations regarding their quota for the service team. And that is such a practical way to provide help for organizations. But unless you begin with clear understanding of an assessment of where things are at, it's very, very difficult to implement strategies that are actually going to change. And oftentimes what will happen is the strategy will focus on the wrong problems to solve instead of the actual problems that need to be solved. So we were able
Yeah,
to do that, and that was very helpful for that particular dealership.
that's really awesome. And you had such a valid point. You have to, actually figure out where the problem is so that you can, you can't assume you know where the problem is. So I think by doing what you're talking about, you can really address like where it goes back to leadership thinking everything's okay and it's
Right.
not until you ask or assess.
Yeah, not assuming that everything is good, assuming that you probably have some gaps. That's just the nature of working in an organization. But
Yeah, and it's
then
okay, right, to have
it is
gaps. Like it's okay.
it,
You're still a great organization. It's just there's some gaps.
there are some gaps, and they can be filled. And those gaps, as they are filled, as they are closed, you really begin to gain momentum, and that's where teams begin to thrive. Is when those trust gaps get closed more and more and more with really intentional effort.
Oh, I have a question. How often do you think that companies or organizations should be assessing and looking at this type of information and
Yeah.
doing what you just described?
That's a great question. We have found that this work is really effective for leaders or teams that are beginning for the first time together. So maybe a brand new leader, or they're just
Oh,
at a point where they feel like they need to begin again. So we kind of have this phrase where we say, whether you're beginning for the first time or ready to begin again, this work is really helpful. It allows you to get your arms wrapped around your workplace culture to identify those gaps. And then the actual assessment itself, it takes 7 minutes. It's completely anonymous. I don't even capture email addresses. We provide that assessment to the leadership team, however they want that to be shared. We take the assessment, we couple it with a workshop. It could be a half day or a full day or a multi-day workshop where we're working with them to develop a blueprint. And as we develop that blueprint, now we start creating a plan in order to help close these trust gaps. And then after that, we typically recommend that you redeploy that assessment every 6 months or 12 months just to ensure that you're aware of any gaps that may be forming or any blind spots that you didn't catch the first time around. Because the assessment itself is so painless and it takes such little time, we feel like it's worth it to do it every 6 months or 12 months, depending on sometimes teams, they are survey fatigued. They don't want to do another survey, which we totally get. This is different than like a satisfaction survey. Satisfaction survey typically measures loyalty. Our survey is all focused further upstream on trust. So it's definitely a difference between the two types of surveys.
and would you say the survey is like if I were to take the survey, would I discover some things about myself by taking it? Like at the end of it, would I feel
As
different or
yeah, as a leader, if you were a leader or a mid manager or an employee, absolutely, you would number one be able to see what is the overall trust assessment score, which we have that on a scale of 1 to 100. I have
okay?
clients that are at 35%, and then I have clients that are at 85%, and then everywhere in between. And so no matter where you are at, you are able to see what is our baseline so that we know what is our goal over the next 6 months or 12 months. And then the nice part about the assessment is that all of the data, it's nested in that structure of trust framework. So when it's presented to a leadership team, they're given the data, but they're not only just given the data, they're given it to them in the structure of trust construct or the frame. And that way, as we look at the data, we begin moving more towards talking about this framework that's really helpful for people to hold on to and then begin to implement within their conversations and their teams. And we want to equip them with a model that works. So we actually look at the data within the framework of the structure of trust itself. And so then you're not as focused only on the data. You're using the data as a bit of a springboard into, okay, how do we move together? How do we actually do something about this? Which it's why the subtitle of my book, the title is Closing the Trust Gap, and then the subtitle is Taking Action on What Matters Most for Leaders, Teams, and Organizations. And it's when we begin to take action on trust that we start to see some very healthy, positive changes. And
Yeah.
it's not complex. It is challenging though. And it's amazing to me how challenging it can be for some teams and organizations. I think oftentimes They are distracted. They are unfocused. They have been so busy and they are overwhelmed. And sometimes an outside facilitator, an outside instrument like an assessment can really help reset what's happening within the culture.
Yeah, I could see that because especially in the dealership world, everyone's just kind of like surviving and just pulled in so many different directions. So having someone come in and help facilitate that. And, I think you had mentioned like when you're ready to begin again, it's like you there's probably to a point where people feel like, they just need that help. It's finally
Right.
like, I can't do this. I need help.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That sometimes it comes down to we've lost trust. We need serious help. Or sometimes it's we feel like things are going pretty well. We want to verify that and we want to continue
yeah.
our momentum. And that's fine as well.
That's a good point too, because you don't want to always address things when there's a problem. You want to be proactive and really stay ahead of. So I can see how both sides of that, and then again, just taking that action to not just take the surveys and assessment, but also helping take the action to execute.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Don't talk about it, just execute.
Yes.
So yeah, so to wrap up, I think that anyone listening could get a lot of value. Just even, finding your book. It's on Amazon because I think that's where I got it.
Yes. It's
And
on Amazon. Easy to find on Amazon.
yeah, and it's an easy, good read. Is there anything that you want to add as we wrap up the show?
So yeah, Kaylee, it's easy. The book itself is easy to find on Amazon, or you can go to trustgapbook.com, and that's the direct link to Amazon.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate you and everything that you're doing for just the world, basically.
Yeah.
It's not the
Yeah,
industry.
you're welcome. If anyone wants to connect, they can find me on LinkedIn as well, and I'm happy to connect. If people have a question about the work that we do, they can send a direct message and we can go from there. But really appreciate the opportunity to share more about my book and the work that I do. And thank you for your commitment to leadership and building trust and stronger workplace cultures. And I'm grateful for the work that you all are doing as well.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
You bet. Thank you, Kaylee.
Thank you for joining us. PartsEdge, the power tool for your parts department. We hope you're leaving feeling motivated, challenged, and inspired.